if you like to be creative, I think one of the things that's attractive about CME for people who like writing is that you're using both right and left side brain functions. There's latitude for more creativity than perhaps in regulatory writing or some other part of medical writing. And so you could be working on different types of projects within a given month. And that's very sort of interesting and stimulating.
Welcome to this new episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Today I have the great pleasure of having with me Alex Howson. Alex is a medical writer, educator, and podcaster. A former trauma operating room nurse, she was faculty at the universities of Aberdeen and Edinburgh in Scotland for a decade, where she taught undergraduate and graduate courses in the sociology of the body, gender, and health. She left academia in 2004 and subsequently built a thriving freelance medical writing business in the US that specialized in creating content for continuing medical education in the health professions. Alex now shares her deep expertise in healthcare and education with new-to-the-field medical writers. Through courses, coaching, and community, she teaches writers how to confidently create education content for health professionals and build a sustainable CME/CE writing niche. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis, Alex. I'm super happy to have you here today.
Oh, thanks, David. It's great to be here. I love the live vibe for sure.
It's great. And the reason I started doing these live recordings is first, it allows people to see how an interview is recorded and how the conversation goes and how naturally or clunky sometimes it is.
Yeah.
But also, I think for us, for me, who are who I'm interviewing, and for the guest, it's a different energy to be live. It's not that it's stressful, but I think it's different somehow, and I like it. I enjoy it like this.
Well, you certainly have a little more adrenaline and probably a lot more cortisol spiking because of the live aspect and all the potential for tech to go wrong.
Exactly, and they have happened. I've lost the image. I've lost contact with people, but in the end, it's just more to tell, more stories to tell about the different recordings and the different interviews. So it's great. I don't stress about
that's good. You're very relaxed about it.
Yes. So, Alex, of course, we are going to talk about medical communications, specifically about CME, CE, like I was saying before, because I'm here in Montreal, and there's quite a certain number of agencies here that work in that domain. I've actually done some translation because it's Montreal, some translation in that domain, but we're going to go into that. But to start, I'd really like to share to the people watching, to the people listening, a little bit of your journey, because we've heard about nursing, in the operating room. We've heard about teaching at university, sociology of the body, a term that I had never heard before. Can you talk a little bit about your journey through health, but also science, and how you kind of got to today? I imagine not a very straight line, but more of a winding road.
Exactly, a winding road, liquid life, as Zygmunt Bauman, who was an eminent sociologist. I'm saying is or was. I'm not actually sure if he's still living. He's very, very old. So how do all these things fit together? I originally trained as a nurse in Scotland back in the 80s. I'm very old. And worked for many years as a trauma OR nurse, and then went to university in 87, I think, is when I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Edinburgh, and fell in love with. I've always been, someone who loves learning. Even when I was a little kid, my nose was always in a book. I was always trying to kind of find out, where ideas came from, what things meant, that kind of thing. And always valued the the things that we read and learn about, what they teach us, and always was committed to the idea that we can learn from pretty much everything that shows up in our lives. So when I got to university in the late 80s, I knew I just landed in a treasure trove, a place that I really wanted to be. And so when I finished my undergraduate degree, I kind of didn't want to leave. And doing some kind of postgraduate work was the obvious way to hang around for a bit longer. And so I applied for some funding from the Economic and Social Research Council, as it then was. I'm not sure if it's still that in the UK, to do my PhD at the University of Edinburgh. And while I was there, I actually had a baby in the second year of my thesis, as you do, and in my third year, got a full-time job teaching in the department where I was doing my PhD. So that allowed me to hang around academia for quite a bit longer, and had a full teaching load, as well as finishing my research. And then from there moved to the University of Aberdeen after I finished my PhD, and was there for several years. I moved with my family in 2004 to the States, where I had lived as a child, actually. And that's where the path became very wobbly and very broken. Lots of potholes in terms of what I was going to do next. We'd moved our family 6,000 miles. I had no academic network in the US really to speak of. And so it was pretty challenging to get back into academia on a different continent. So from there, I started to think about, well, what can I do? What are my skills? And really take a deep dive into how I was going to use what I was able to do to create some new trajectory, some new path. And that's what got me into actually editing first, and then writing, and editing within an academic context. So I edited for a group called Science Docs, which is still around in the US. I think they're based out of Oregon, and they provide editing services for our graduate students. And so kind of, working with graduate students to polish the language in their thesis prior to submission, just on a very kind of surface level. And from there, moved into medical writing, and I can talk a little bit more about that if you want me to.
Yeah, well, let's see where we go from here. A first question, and this story of crossing the ocean, moving a family, or just anyway moving on your own and leaving a network behind, or a social network also behind it. It's a story a lot of us who go to graduate and doc and postdoc live through that. Just to kind of put some bring some metrics and to kind of normalize the time frame of these things happening. How long did it take for you to find your bearings in a way, and find science docs, and then get that first job doing this editing work? How long did it take?
I'd say 6 to 9 months. In retrospect, that doesn't actually feel like very long. At the time, it felt like a long
It feels
time.
huge, right? It feels
Yeah.
enormous.
Yeah. And I spent a lot of time on the internet, just trying to kind of figure out what was out there. And this is back in 2004. So everything was a bit slower, and a different infrastructure, I think, to, how you can find things. And so a lot of exploration, a lot of digging and trawling to try and kind of figure out, what the options were. And then stumbling. Of course, serendipity always plays a role. I think when you're in that kind of space, And so, inevitably or eventually stumbled on some groups like Science Docs that looked as though they might be, an option, at least in the early days.
Excellent. So yeah, I just want people to kind of hear how much time it took someone to figure out something, because I think people might think, oh, I just got this degree, and it's the best degree there is, and so now I should, open a page, choose a position, and get hired. And especially if you're also moving and changing spaces geographically, there's, it adds to the complexity of the process, but it does take time to get that first position. And I think getting out of graduate school and into the job market is kind of akin to moving countries, because you're changing spaces, and unless you've done a lot of networking before, and you said you arrived without any network, um, it takes time, and it's normal.
It is normal, and it does take time. And I should also add that, at the same time, there was kind of overlap in looking for alternative work outside academia, um, to actually applying for academic positions. And that was, it's a tortuous process. And I think something interesting happened while I was doing that, which was that I realized I didn't actually want to be in academia anymore. Because there were certain aspects of it that I could see weren't really going to fit with where I was in my life at that time. My kids were still a bit younger, and we'd moved 6,000 miles. And also, it's a grind. It can be a grind. And so I think I was beginning to feel some of that, at the same time. And so, in retrospect, those challenging negative experiences of not getting interviews, never mind not getting shortlisted, um, actually challenged me and invited me, let's just say it, they invited me to really take a hard look at how I was going to use my academic expertise and my identity as an academic. And that took a lot longer to shed. I mean, I literally took a couple of days, sometime around 2007, and shredded all the paperwork from my thesis and from a lot of the teaching that I'd been doing, as an assistant professor, as a lecturer, as the term is in the UK. So it's a process for sure.
It is a process. It's interesting, this question that you just touched upon, of identity or self identity, because it's true that for many reasons, the path to like masters, PhD, postdoc, etc., is one where you're kind of led to disidentify with a lot of things, often with interests and hobbies, with your country of origin, with to identify with this thing which is the academic career. And of course, I'm generalizing. Academic. I know people who are academics and have many interests, but especially when you move countries and you uh, you go, or you go into this prestigious program, it's easy to fall in what I consider as a trap, to over identify with that. And the trap is that it's a very difficult process. You might decide to leave, and then if you've shared all of these other things, and this is the only one you're hanging to, you might feel that I failed at life, and it's not that at all. But I find it super interesting that it took a few years for you to go and say, okay, I need to say goodbye to this this thing that I had held so dear for so long.
Yeah, and I actually think that's really important. I see this in the people that I work with who are kind of trying to break into medical writing as CME writers. They're academics, they're clinicians, they're bench scientists. So we're talking about heavy duty people in terms of their intellectual capital and their ability usually to get things done. And they move out of these contexts for a number of different reasons, from feeling frazzled to being completely burned out, arrive in the field of medical writing, and they're attracted to that because they're lifelong learners and they're information synthesizers, and then have this kind of identity crisis because they feel as though they don't know anything in this new world. And of course they do. We all do. But I think you do need to take stock. I think you do need to be intentional about taking a little bit of time and effort and energy to figure out what your attachment is and then practice non-attachment and somehow manage to uh, let some things go.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one of the other ways that I try to get young, especially young graduate students, to start working on this is to diversify their portfolio of interests during graduate school. And I know it's tough because your PI will want you to have just one interest in life, which is your thesis. But I think it's super important to start early on to widen your horizons and think, okay, I have one chance in five of becoming a professor, so I need to take care of the other four. They're much larger than that one, and I cannot not look at them and not invest in at least starting to map them even during graduate school. It's difficult, but it's what I'm trying to do, and so I try to do with this podcast, which is to expose people to people like you and to what they've done and to how they got there and to the existential crisis they went through while reaching where they are. So I really appreciate you sharing all
Yeah.
this.
No, absolutely. And I should say that, I did my PhD, well, a long time ago, in a very different context as well. I didn't have a PI. My work was in the social sciences, in sociology. The focus at that time was very much, you get your funding, you have to be a kind of self-starting. You determine the research question, you you do the recruiting, the scheduling. I worked, I trained as a qualitative researcher, so the interviewing, the transcripts, all of that, and I had supervisors, but it also wasn't a taught graduate program, so you were pretty much on your own to try and kind of figure out how to get things done. But I think the thing that really helped me, to your point about cultivating those other interests or those other dimensions, was when I started working as faculty in the department, because it was a very top heavy expertise department. I was a very, very junior member, but I got put in charge of running the department seminars. And so that brought me into contact with, you know, eminent sociologists all over the world. It helped me to think about how to create connection. And it gave me skills in, gave me admin skills and kind of holding all the pieces together to get a seminar program up and running. And there were other things too that, because of the circumstances in which I did my graduate work, I actually was able to cultivate some of those other threads that I think have helped me post academia. But I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important to have those other things in your pocket.
Yeah, yeah, and like you say, experiences that are not totally departed from your being in your department and doing your research, like what you did, are not, are not not that demanding, and the gain that you can have from them is huge. You're not the first person sharing here on the show how, starting or launching with other colleagues a seminar series has really resonated in their professional life afterwards, and also had an effect on their even on their academic career too. So yeah, I'm super grateful that you're sharing all this. Now, to the transition from, okay, editing, editing content for graduate students to medical writing. There's a switch there. It's not the same space. It's not the same universe. how did that transpire, let's say?
Well, it transpired because I'm not an editor. You know, I
Which is
can
it's true. People train to be editors. I'm fully
exactly.
yeah.
And
I've
I
had
can't
editors, and I
emphasize,
know.
yeah, I can't emphasize that, enough that people who are trained as copy editors, substantive editors, and lots of layers in between, are trained to do that work. And I knew pretty early on that, I could make a decent job because I'd supervised students. And so I taught, so I could make a decent job of providing some kind of feedback. But I knew that's what wasn't really where I wanted to kind of put my energies. And I had started to do some consulting work for a couple of nonprofit organizations that involved a lot of research and writing, and those were the other two kind of skills in my toolbox that I thought I could, make something of. So I, started to do a little bit more freelance research and writing, and kind of stumbled into medical writing. Stumble's the wrong word. A lot of the research and consulting that I was doing was in the kind of nonprofit public health world, and so that's not a huge leap into writing about medicine and healthcare. I found the American Medical Writers Association and realized, okay, there's a whole world actually in which people do write medical and healthcare focused content. I could do that. And so started to kind of poke around the margins of that organization, joined in 2010 or 2008, I think. And that was a really great kind of opening up of all the possibilities within medical writing. That's when I found continuing medical education. I went to a workshop hosted by a colleague and someone who's now become a very good friend. And I realized at that point I'd landed in a sweet spot because continuing medical education is about clinical work, it's about teaching and learning, and it's about research.
Yeah. And if you're, like you said, if you're knowledge hungry, you get to learn about a lot of interesting things. If you were in healthcare before, so I guess you had, there was some kinship there. I can totally see, yeah, I can totally see how that was a good fit for you. But I still feel that it's a very particular subspace in or subset in medical writing, continuing medical education. Uh, from the projects I've worked on, uh, and again, I translated content, but it looks to me like there's a bunch of rules. There's uh, collaboration between agencies and universities. Can you talk a little bit about because right now you said, oh, I went to this workshop. It looked like a good fit for me, but I'm sure you've had a lot to learn in those first months where you were, launched into your first projects, because it's quite complex, or it can be quite complex.
Mhm.
Lawyers, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And it took more than a few months, actually. It took a few years really to kind of peel back the layers. You're right. Continuing medical education is a very subterranean world. And I think unless you're kind of somewhere on the margins touching the work, or you are a clinician, it's, the chances are you haven't really stumbled across it. Um, you talked about agencies, which leads me to think you were probably working with non-accredited continuing medical education. And there's a division between accredited and non-accredited. So there's even, another layer of complexity there.
So the ones that I've worked on have always been an agency in conjunction with the university, let's say McGill University, and an agency, and it uh, from what I remember, and I do remember anyway, because I translated different things to do with the training, that they, and I don't know what, if this is what you mean by accredited, but the MDs that go through those trainings then can have some credits for that they need to keep their license, etc. Is that what you mean by accredited? I wonder.
Yeah. So, what accreditation means is in North America, although there are some differences between Canada and the US, is that if you're a healthcare professional, physician, nurse, pharmacist, other things too, other specialty designations as well. You have to get so many credits every year to maintain your licensure, to maintain your certification, to continue being fit for practice. In the US, each state determines its own the number of credits that clinicians have to attain every year. And in the US, that system is accredited by the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education. And there are 7 other accreditation bodies, and the American Medical Writers, the American Medical Associations involved. In Canada, the Royal College of Physicians has agreements with the Accreditation Council for CME in the US. In Europe and the UK, the accreditation system is completely different. And often very country-based, and even within those countries, specialty-based. So the accreditation system itself is incredibly complex. But that's what accredited medical education is, or education for health professionals.
Okay, and of course there are really good reasons for that, because it's the people who take care of us, so they need
Exactly.
they need to follow standards and rules. And
they need to follow standards and rules, and also the education needs to be free from commercial interest. It needs to be free from industry bias and influence. And in the US, there's been a few cases where, that has come under scrutiny at the federal level, and that has led to a lot of changes in, accreditation, regulatory frameworks, and so on. So it's important.
yeah. So in a way, another interesting aspect of CME is that if you're really interested in that and interested in how health works and health policy works, there's an aspect of that in it. But again, it depends on where you end up in the I guess in the company, or in the, well, it wouldn't be the, anyway, in the CME, how do you call these entities on in the States who who produce CME content?
Education providers. I mean, they are actually called entities, but they're education providers, and there are different types of providers, from medical specialty societies like the American College of Cardiology to federal organizations, to medical education companies, which often have some connection to publishers, or stand alone to create CME and CE, often in collaboration with other organizations like universities or medical schools and that kind of thing.
Okay. And
Or the
when you
whole
say
bunch.
CE, it's just continuing education.
Continuing education for health professionals. So CME in the US, at least, is very particularly focused on physicians. Continuing education more broadly is, nurses, pharmacists, dentists, osteopaths, the whole gamut.
I think it's interesting, and again, it can be depending on your your point of entry and why you're gravitating towards medical writing. It may be of interest to you to know these things, and um, to know the type of mechanisms and the type of structure that is behind this type of work. But now let's get back to the work. What, when you did that workshop that you mentioned a few minutes ago, w- what can you give 2 or 3 elements that that gave you that aha moment of, okay, this is where I want to go? What are elements of the work of writing for CME that caught your attention, and that you felt, okay, this is some place I can really leverage my strengths and create a career and flourish.
Well, I think the main thing was really that, because it was education for health professionals and I had been a health professional, I knew that I could continue to contribute to clinical care, in some way. And that was very appealing because I'd been out of nursing for several years. There were definitely aspects of nursing that I missed, in terms of, having contact with patients, being able to make a difference in people's lives, being able to, um, problem solve on a daily basis. So that aspect of it was definitely appealing. I had no idea it existed. Um, it didn't really exist when I was a nurse in Scotland. The system there is slightly different. It's called continuing professional development. That did come in around 1996, but initially for physicians, not for nurses. So I hadn't been exposed to continuing education when I was a clinician. So that part of it definitely was very appealing. And then the other things that really pulled me were that I knew I could use my writing skills. I knew I could use my research skills. And I knew that, I knew teaching and learning. And so I was pretty confident that I would be able to sort of factor that into the mix somehow. Of course, you're always learning new things, and the world of teaching and learning has changed significantly. So that's definitely a part that is constantly evolving for me. But I think those were the main things. There was alignment between professional interest, clinical experience, and my current skill set at that time that kind of pulled me forward.
It made you confident that you could step into that space. Now, you did say that it took some years to learn about, all that CME contains or comprises, and I guess also to get to feel that you were you were how can I say, um, professionally, that you were bringing all to the table that you could in that space, because you were, let's say, a novice. It's a complex thing. Would you say that you've had imposter uh, feelings at that time? Um, and I'm saying this because I know a lot of people who ask about, for example, medical writing. I always think, oh, am I going to be good at this? Um, you know what? How did my PhD prepare me to be a writer? I don't understand it. How was it for you, those first years? That learning curve. Um, how was it for you internally, and how was the process of appropriating yourself of all these skills and this knowledge that was first kind of invisible to you, or at least unknown?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think patchy is the short answer.
Patchy is a great word. I like it.
um, you know, how to start answering that question? Well, first of all, I'm a pragmatist. And so I approach life with the idea that most problems can be solved. Most problems in front of me can be solved. I'll figure it out. I'm always saying to my kids, okay, we'll figure it out. That's how I approach life. And so at each stage, I encountered some new type of problem. I didn't know how to do a particular project. I didn't know how to find clients. I didn't know um, where to find solid information to help me build content. I didn't know what all these accreditation rules and regulations really meant. I didn't know who my clients, where they fit into the ecosystem. At each stage, there's always a way that you can do some digging and figure stuff out. And you combine that with your ethos as a graduate student, somebody who's been through graduate school and who's done a PhD, who's been in that research world. One of the things that experience gives you is be tenacious. And so, I think if you've been in academia as a graduate student, you're going to learn some version of tenacity. So you just keep digging and poking and trying to kind of figure out a way to solve the problem in front of you and get access to more and better information. I think to your point about imposter syndrome, I prefer to think about that in terms of self-doubt. Imposter syndrome is a very um, it's very much attached to kind of white middle class affluent college educated young women. That's where that's where the research originated. And I know there's a whole kind of literature around that, but there is actually um, increasingly a pushback from women of color in particular against the idea of imposter syndrome um, because it's a concept of privilege. And so I've stopped thinking about those types of experiences in terms of imposter syndrome and started to think about them in terms of self-doubt, which I think everybody has. That's part of life. That's part of being human. You have self-doubt when you're a graduate student. Can I do the work? Can I do the research? Am I smart enough? I think my internal narrative for decades was, I'm not sure if I'm clever enough. Well, of course, it's got nothing to do with being clever. It's to do with all sorts of other things. So I think that in those, not just in those first few years, self-doubt it doesn't magically disappear. You get more confident, you get more experience, and then you hit a new problem and you think, oh, I don't know how to do this. And it all comes tumbling down again. So yes, there was a lot of self-doubt. And I think for me, that lack of knowledge about what is this world that I've found myself in was a big contributor to self-doubt, because you don't know if what you're doing is really meeting all the expectations of the various people that you're working with. And as a freelancer, you don't always get feedback on your work beyond, okay, this is great, we're moving on. You don't get that kind of detailed feedback that you get in grad school. And sometimes you don't even get that in grad school. And so you only know if your work is good if you A, get paid, and B, the same client rehires you for another project. And then you can take that as an indication. So you have to do a lot of that self-doubt excavation and management yourself. And I do think there are tools. I think I developed tools over time that have helped me to do that. But yeah, I'm not immune to self-doubt for sure.
Mhm. No, but being a pragmatic, I think it's probably a good way to. It probably helps you when you hit a wall, saying, "Okay, how am I going to get over this wall, under this wall, go around this wall? We'll find a way."
Knock
Excellent.
down a brick or two.
That's another way through the wall.
Yeah.
Now, Alex, that's interesting, and I haven't found. Actually, I just had an interview not so long ago about the imposter. Actually, there's another thing happening is that people are averting the syndrome. So imposter feelings, imposter phenomenon. There's different ways people are alluding or talking about it, but
I think that's because the concept is problematic.
it is problematic, and syndrome has also this kind of health, this kind of, yeah,
It's
it feels like you said the
pathologized. Yeah,
disease is pathologized. In any case,
absolutely.
um, there's another whole episode about that, so people can go hear about that. But now about specific skills to do, or about specific ways of working to do with writing for CME, and because I just want to kind of give a little picture, and we're kind of reaching the end of the interview, but a little picture of what your day to day is, and you've already mentioned two or three things that I think may and will be of interest to my listeners, which are getting clients. How does that happen? Keeping clients, well, that depends on, again, like you said, on if they are satisfied with how you work or with your style. There's different aspects there. But can you talk a little bit about the day to day of working in that space? Because I imagine with the people you coach, they probably arrive with some common questions, or maybe some questions of, is my skill set enough to be working in CME? Can you talk a little bit about that? What skills are required? what tasks are common, what a project looks like, and I let you choose what you,
Yeah, there's lots of different questions
which
there.
way you want to look at it from.
Yeah, well, I think one of the advantages of being in CME is that there are lots of different types of projects that you can work on, from needs assessments, which are documents which identify problems in clinical care and clinical practice, and use education as a solution to those problems. And so you're kind of writing about clinical practice gaps and performance gaps, and um, crafting learning objectives, and helping the education provider, the client that you're working with, really map out a solid story to get some grant funding, for an education program. You can work on the education activities themselves, from text-based content, to interactive patient cases, which are housed online, to escape rooms, to podcast scripts, to quizzes. There's a lot of different formats. And so if you like to be creative, I think one of the things that's attractive about CME for people who like writing is that you're using both right and left side brain functions. It's a little, there's latitude for more creativity than perhaps in regulatory writing or some other part of medical writing. And so, to answer your question about day in the life, you could be working on different types of projects within a given month, and that's very sort of interesting and stimulating. In terms of finding clients, um, there's an art and a science to that. At the very beginning, I was really old school and literally knocked on doors, and called people up on the phone, or sent them cold emails. Um, that's not the most efficient way to find clients, for sure. I connected pretty early on in my freelance career with a marketing specialist called Marketing Mentor. Uh, Marketing Mentor is a woman called Elise Bennon, and I can provide information to put in your show notes, because she works with lots of different people, but especially creatives and writers, and she really teaches a way of finding clients that is generosity based and relationship based. And so at the very beginning, really, of my sort of freelance writing career, I focused on building relationships. And this is where networks come in, and this is where your capacity to connect with people and to be generous and share what you know really pay off in the long run. And if you've been in a graduate program, if you've done your PhD, you have lots of things to share. You know lots of things. Um, so I really kind of invested a lot of time and effort in trying to kind of build relationships with people in my field. And the main way I did that was actually by attending. There's a huge kind of annual conference, so I've done that pretty much every year for the last uh, 13, 14 years, and arrange to meet people and have coffee with them and conversations, and really sort of try to build those relationships out. And that's really helped to find clients, because then you have a more solid connection between you than doing what I was doing at the beginning, which was calling people up out of the blue. And sometimes that did pay off, but it's an energy suck. And I definitely wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend building relationships, because then you can share, you can be generous, and people remember that. You're gonna be top of mind when they're thinking about projects.
And at the beginning, when you started going to that conference, in what capacity were you going? How were you making the most of the conference in terms of meeting people and creating genuine relationships with them? This is again me thinking of the listener, just
Yeah.
trying to kind of emulate what you did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not you didn't wouldn't even need to be in the field that I'm in, to use these techniques. what I've always tried to do is, find out who's going to the conference, and different conferences have different ways of sharing this information. But getting a list of 10 attendees, figuring out whether they work for a company that you want to perhaps start building a relationship with a view to doing some work for them, doing a little bit of research around the types of projects they do, whether they hire freelance writers, and then reaching out to them. I'm not sure if conferences do this. I think they do. When you've registered, you get their email. You have contact with them, so you can send them a message. On most conferences have apps now, so send them a message on the conference app and say, you're going to be at the conference. You're really interested in what they're doing around X. You'd love to have a conversation about that, because people want to have conversations. They want to connect, to tell you about themselves. They don't want to listen to you talking about yourself necessarily until you have that connection. So get your list, figure out who you want to talk to, send them a message and say you want to hear them talk about X. And then when you're having those conversations at the conference, you can start to kind of seed information about what you do and how you can help them. I think that's the other part of that relationship building aspect, is people really want to know how you can solve their problem. And so doing a little bit of research ahead of time and figuring out what is it that you could bring that would actually help them move the needle a little bit. That's such an overused phrase, but it's the one that comes to mind at the moment. That's often a good kind of tactic, just to kind of get the ball rolling. And then after the conference, you follow up with them. I really loved our conversation. You were talking about Project X. I could help you do Y. And so, you keep that momentum going after the conference as well. And I know that, for a lot of people, that face-to-face connection and networking can be challenging and can be hard work. Yeah, for sure. And sometimes a little frightening. But when you flip the script and you think about it in terms of you want to listen to what they have to say, and you want them to go away thinking you can help them somehow, I think that takes the fear out of it a little bit. And of course, so much networking is online now. LinkedIn is a great platform for doing that kind of networking.
Yeah, you can do that same process on LinkedIn without the in-person aspect, for sure. But I can attest to the fact that there's a different power to in-person events and in-person meeting people. We're human, and I think the first even nonverbal communication is that interaction, the shaking of hands, the eye to eye. There's something else there, but it's not necessary obligatorily. Now, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
And that can help or hinder, for sure.
It can. Now, one aspect that, at least for me, is important is I feel a certain amount of us who go to grad school, at least that I've known, at least identify as introverts. And if you are going to a live event, let's say 2-3 days, do add into your schedule recovery time if you need it. And because you won't be having great interactions if you're drained, if your battery is is low, let's say. So do think of that if you are going into an in-person setting, but too much in-person interaction drains you. I feel you were going to react to this.
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree. One of the things that I've actually done for years is I very seldom stay at the conference hotel. I try and stay at a different hotel, because that it's just a boundary marker for me. It helps me make that transition from conference space to my space. Exactly. And I couldn't agree more with that. And it's heartening to see. I'm a yoga teacher as well, and I have actually taught yoga sessions at conferences. Breathing and chair yoga and that kind of thing. It is heartening to see that a lot of conference organizers are beginning to build in some of those opportunities to regulate your nervous system, which is really what we're talking about here. And if the conference doesn't do that for you, there are lots of simple ways you can do that for yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and staying off-site is a great one. I never thought of that. Of course,
Sometimes
if
cheaper too.
it's possible, sometimes cheaper, but if it's possible to. Now we're really reaching the end of the interview, and this has been great. It feels like time flew,
It really
um,
has.
hasn't it? But one thing that I maybe like to finish on this note again of trying to have some tips and tricks for the listeners. I mentioned at the very beginning in your intro that um, you want to help people build a sustainable niche in CME, CE, and there's two aspects to this that I find that we could finish on, which is the sustainable part and the niche part. I'm really always interested when people talk about how to create a niche or the importance of having a niche for what you do today in any domain, be it in podcasting, be it now, like you're saying, in medical writing. So I don't know if you can in a few minutes tell us what you mean by a sustainable CME niche, um, and how, and maybe give two or three of the advice that you usually share to help people, point themselves towards that objective.
Yeah, in 2 minutes or less. Um, yeah, so I am a proponent of niches for a couple of reasons. One is it allows you to, and they're related. I'm not even sure if there are two reasons. It really allows you to dial into a particular, it could be a subject area, it could be a disease state, it could be a therapeutic area, it could be a particular type of client. So, for instance, maybe you just want to work for medical societies. That's a niche. Maybe you just want to work in cardiology or neurology. That can be your niche. And I think one of the things that defining some type of niche for yourself does is it conserves your energy. In CME, you can be working on all sorts of different projects, and that's great. It certainly feeds creativity, but it can also be exhausting. Some of these projects are incredibly detailed. You're writing a thesis in 4 weeks, and then you're moving on to the next thesis, literally, because you have to take such a deep dive into the material. And so I think that if you limit your limits, uh, that can be a really negative word, but if you build a boundary around the types of projects that you want to work on, or the types of clients you want to work on, or the disease state, then you are conserving your energy so that you can really invest the best of yourself in that niche. The other part of that is you're also building authority and expertise. And I think that becomes really important, because going back to the conferences, you don't have to just go as an attendee. You can start to go as a presenter, start submitting abstracts, start building your expertise and authority in your field, so that your potential clients really know who you are, and you're going to have to do less of those, reaching out to people before a conference to meet them for the first time, because people will already know who you are. I think that's really valuable. Um, and faster, you can do the work faster. That's the other part of it. And so you make more money.
And I guess if you are conserving energy, creating authority, you are building that sustainability, because you are also not going to be spread out trying to do everything. And even your promotion can be more focused and less, shotgun, left and right. Um, so so how do you what does a sustainable career in CME look like? Let's say people have started, they worked with you a little bit, and now they have a sustainable, or they at least for the moment are in a sustainable stretch of their career in medical writing. What does that look like? What what does what do you like your coachees to look like once they've gone through that process?
Well, we establish those kind of goals on a case by case basis. But I think that sustainability is, um, having a stable group of clients. You don't need many, maybe five or six. from whom you can expect momentum and a stream of work over the course of a year. And you also have space in your schedule to add in smaller projects from new clients that maybe you want to test out at different points in the year. So I think the first part of sustainability is having, a stable group of clients. Doesn't have to be a huge group, but at least a small group that you're pretty sure you can count on. Now that stable group might change every couple of years, and that's why marketing is so important. Consistent marketing is so important. But having a core group, making sure that you have that kind of core group, that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, like any other field, and of course at the moment, many fields are like this. There's a lot of flux in the industry. Your clients might move job. The company might disintegrate. There's always a lot of change, and so sustainability means that you have some pieces in place to make sure that when you lose one client, you know where to look for that replacement. And again, marketing is key here. And when I say marketing, I'm still talking about that relationship building piece, keeping those connections open, following up with people on a regular basis, whether that's a phone call once a quarter or an email or a newsletter, or sending people an article that you've come across that you think they're going to enjoy. All these things are just threads of connection that are part of keeping that marketing momentum going to help you build that sustainable niche. And then I think the third pillar is really your personal and business well-being. Thinking about things like energy and time, thinking about the course of your working year, when the times in year when you have more energy than others, the times of year when there's going to be more money in your clients than others. End of the year, they got money to spend, they're trying to get projects rushed, which is great if you have energy at the end of the year. I do not want to be taking on new projects in November and December because I know I'm already tired. So having that self-knowledge about the energy of your business over the course of a year and your personal energy, I think is a kind of key part of the sustainability piece, and what you're doing to fill your own cup, whether that's movement practices, journaling, meditation, whatever you do, going for walks, whatever you do to make sure that your energy is not getting depleted on a consistent basis.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. It feels like I've been having a CME yoga class with you.
I love that.
It's kind of summing up some main points of this conversation. They do feel a bit yogic. So you found a domain where you felt there was alignment, and this kind of yoga is about alignment.
Yes,
We
it can
talked
be.
about can be. You just talked about conserving your energy in terms of the 12-month calendar and knowing when you can go and when it's not right for you. That it's kind of yogic too in a way. I'm sorry to now somehow aligning this to yoga, but you mentioned
No,
that,
I love it.
you
That's
do it,
great. Works for
and
me.
and that you've taught it. And then one thing that we didn't we en passant you mentioned it, that seeing someone teach something led you to understand, okay, this might be for me. And I imagine that if we started another hour of conversation and I went back and I said, okay, at this point, who were the people who were influential, I'm sure you would have different people that were key at different points in this journey that you just mentioned. And I think in yoga also there's this transmission of disciple to student. Anyway, I wonder if it's too poetic for me now at the end of the interview, but it really kind of gelled for me as you were talking, that from what you said, and again looking back, it's always 2020, and but of course when you were living through it, it was chaotic, like you said, it was patchy, like you said. But I think from what you said, trying to respect your interests, trying to trust that if you've done a PhD, you have a lot to bring on the table, and to, of course, you'll have to learn other things, other languages, other cultures, but trust that all you've done so far is enough for the next step. I really, really enjoyed all you had to say on that side, and I'm really grateful that you came and shared it with us. I wonder whether you have a last word of inspiration for someone who's really now looking for their first foot in the door in the CME domain. But if not, I'm already satisfied with all that you've shared so far.
The thing that came to mind, which is a yogic saying, and I can't remember who said it, is the obstacle is the way. I think it's actually a Buddhist saying. And, for me, that absolutely rings true. And it's not a bad thing. It just means that you have stuff to figure out. And isn't that what doing a PhD is all about?
Oh, yes, it is. Alex, this has been great. If someone just listened or watched this interview and wants to reach out to you, what's the best place? I'm sharing here on video your website, www.alexhowson.com. Also on the website you can find Alex's podcast called Right Medicine. So it's alexhowson.com/right-medicine-podcast. But if someone wants to reach out to you, ask you questions about medical writing, about CME specifically, or about yoga, who knows? Where's the best place to find you and to reach out to you?
I am on LinkedIn. That's the main social platform that I'm on. Alex Howson. I was going to say I'm easy to find, but there's actually another Alex Howson. But it's Alexandra Howson, PhD, CHCP. You can also email me at alex@alexhowson.com. I answer everyone's emails.
That is super easy, and I will add that. I will add the links in the show notes too. Alex, this was great. I had a great time talking with you. I think it was a very because CME and it's like regulatory and even medical writing can get very technical. We did for a few minutes there. We were a little bit more technical, but I think you really brought the human aspect of how you went through this transition from academia to finding this career and to now helping people find a career in this domain. I really, really enjoyed this hour with you, and I want to thank you for spending it with me here and with the audience of Beyond the Thesis.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was such a delight to be asked.
Thank you for listening to another Beyond the Thesis conversation with me, David Mendez, and my guest, Alex Howson. If you found any value in this conversation, please share it with someone like you and help Beyond the Thesis reach as many ears as possible. And if you want to help a little bit more, please go to papaphd.com/audience and fill in the survey that is there for you, and leave a comment so I can give you a shout out in a future episode. Thank you for being a fan, happy listening, and happy sharing.